All right, I wanted to start off with talking about the Fukushima disaster, just as a baseline for the future. What went wrong there? Was it a somewhat perfect storm of events that led to the meltdown, or was it solely the fault of the earthquake and ensuing tsunami, human error, or was the plant just not constructed in the safest place? Where does the blame lie?
So I think the blame is probably spread around a lot of different places. First I point out that it's, when you characterize it as a Fukushima disaster, and while it was a huge economic disaster for the owner of those reactors, the public health consequences of the meltdown of those reactors has really been very minimal. But back to your question about what was the cause of that, certainly the tsunami was the major initiator to what happened there. The earthquake actually did not cause any trouble at all. All of the plants in Japan survived the earthquake just fine. What happened when the tsunami hit was that it knocked out some of the important safety systems. Now, blame, there's a lot of evidence that says that the Japanese should have been able to predict a tsunami of this magnitude. There's historical records in Japan that tsunamis like this can happen. So there probably were design modifications they should have made to avoid this. And then while the accident was happening, there were some questions about whether or not the regulatory structure was appropriate to allow them to make decisive actions at the right time during the sequence of events while the accident was happening. And those are sort of, I think, the two major the two things that have been pointed out in terms of human performance gaps. So the design of the seawall to hold back the tsunami is one question that's being looked into, and secondly, the communication structure about making decisions about how to mitigate and how to respond to the conditions in the plant.
Okay, great. And I want to speak to, I guess, just nuclear reactors in general. How justifiable is the concern there? How safe is this energy?
So nuclear reactors are very safe. If you look at the history of the nuclear energy industry and look at the kind of accidents that we've had, particularly in the Western-designed reactors, including Fukushima, it sort of fits within the policy curves that our regulators have set for what our tolerance is for having this kind of accident. And you compare it to other energy industries, and really it's got a pretty good record, especially from a public health point of view. The impact on the public of accidents in the nuclear industry are very small. And so it's a very safe industry, and I think it continues to demonstrate a safe record, even if you take these accidents into account.
All right, so now we're up to today and the near future. As someone who's studied nuclear energy and policy, where do you see popular sentiment internationally today? Do people understand that this is a safe way to get energy, or have the disasters that have happened been magnified by the media to make it a concern for the popular public?
I think there's recent evidence just from this last week that, even in the U.S., the public still is supportive of nuclear energy as an important part of our energy mix. The surveying that's been done, for the last few decades, and they've been asking the same questions over and over again, and the public support for nuclear energy is still in the 65% range. It took a little dip after Fukushima immediately, but it's still pretty high. Does that mean everybody wants a new reactor built in their neighborhood? Not quite. So there's cautious support, I would say, in the United States. Other countries have a more widespread support. But everyone is taking a careful look at what their options are, and I think that nuclear energy is seen as an important option in most parts of the world.
Okay, and it seems that some countries have begun to shy away a little bit from nuclear energy. They're refusing to renew licenses or agree to new contracts for more than 40 years out. Where do you see nuclear energy going in the immediate future?
So there's a lot of introspection, I would say, right now. It's true that some countries have backed away. Germany has said that they will, for the second time, they've implemented a plan to shut down their reactors. It seems like this one will be more lasting, given the political climate under which it happened. It's going to be a challenge for them with other commitments they have regarding climate change and CO2 emissions. It'll ultimately end up on them relying to some degree on more nuclear energy being imported from France, and so that's an interesting consequence in itself. Japan also, because of they've just been through this incident in Fukushima in their own territory, and so they're doing a lot of decision making, and day by day you hear different stories about how drastically they're going to pull back or not pull back from relying on nuclear energy. But in the United States, we see sort of a pause. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said they will not issue any new licenses until some other issues have been resolved, particularly with the issue of waste confidence, which is basically a way of describing how confident we are that we will ultimately have a solution for spent nuclear fuel.
Sure. I also have a question about that later in the interview, waste disposal. But so you've discussed now where you see things going in the immediate future. What are your thoughts about the long term?
I think in the long term, we'll probably get back on the same track where globally where we have been for the trajectory we've been for the last few decades. I mean, certainly in the United States, things have been pretty lukewarm for a number of decades, but we have the largest nuclear fleet in the world by a factor of 2 or so. Other countries around the world have seen some pretty substantial growth. Japan was on a trajectory to be 50% nuclear. France, as many people know, is 70 to 80% nuclear. China and India have rapidly expanding programs. And the first reactors in the Persian Gulf are going to be built in the United Arab Emirates in the next few years as well. So I think in the long term, people continue to recognize the valuable role nuclear energy plays in a diversified energy economy.
All right. There was recently a Forbes article just published on Monday discussing the falling prices of uranium in the aftermath of Fukushima. It quoted an MIT statistics that uranium mining meets, quote, 65% of today's reactor requirements. The rest is met by improvements at plants to make them more productive, in addition to decommissioning nuclear weapons. While it's no surprise that there's a limited amount of uranium on the planet, that being said, is there any concern for uranium mining that it would not be able to meet demands in the future?
So the most recent estimates on uranium resources globally are somewhere in the 150 to 200 year time frame. And like any mineral, oil, people are worried about when peak oil will occur, it seems every month, and it never quite happens. And the same is true of uranium. As the demand increased, we would be able to find greater resources. One of the other things about uranium, like most minerals, is that there's actually a large quantity of uranium dissolved in the seawater. And so that is kind of the backstop to all of this, is the price at which we can remove uranium from seawater and harvest that. And because the fuel costs of nuclear energy are such a small fraction of the cost of producing electricity, that actually it's pretty insensitive to those sort of costs. So I don't think running out of uranium is a problem for a long time. And then there's technologies that we're developing to try and overcome that as well.
Right. So do those technologies exist at the moment for extracting uranium from seawater, like you said?
There are pilot experiments going on. Japan is a leader in this area because they have such a small land area and a large coastline. But there's no one doing it at a commercial scale right now. They're working on new technologies to continue bringing the price down before it would go to a commercial scale, because right now it would not be competitive because we have such rich resources terrestrially.
All right. Now moving on to India. They do have nuclear capabilities and also a straining power grid. It's working to gather the necessary resources for nuclear fusion. And then there's the Indo-U.S. nuclear deal. Is this something that developing countries can use as a tool to further develop their infrastructure and economy? It seems like it's impossible to predict technological advances, but will advancements in how nuclear energy is produced allow it to regain its previous luster?
So I think in developing countries there's a lot of interest in nuclear energy. I don't think the luster has been lost, actually. The challenge in a lot of countries is having the right level of technological culture and safety culture to support a safe nuclear industry. This is one of the issues that was, I guess a tangential issue with the Indian-U.S. relationship on nuclear energy, in that even though we have this political agreement, the commercial agreements have come much more slowly because of the liability structures in the Indian laws around these kinds of technologies. And so the adoption of nuclear energy is probably not limited by how interested countries are in it, but really how prepared they are to support it in a safe way.
And in your research on policy, do you look at regulatory structure in developing countries? Is that something you've looked into?
So I don't look into it personally. I have had some sort of less formal experience with it, talking to people from other countries as they're setting up the regulatory infrastructures and recognizing, in some cases, recognizing that they probably aren't quite ready yet for nuclear industry, but imagining that it's on the path of their country in the future.
Okay, so now I wanted to touch on waste disposal. It seems like there's been a lot of advances made in fuel reclamation, but if this is going to start being utilized by developing countries, how can they safeguard against hazardous dumping? And can you speak to wet storage versus dry storage and the pros and cons of each of those methods?
All right, so a lot of pieces in that question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So let me first talk about just broadly what the nuclear fuel cycle options are. So right now in the United States, we follow what people call a once-through fuel cycle. We take uranium out of the ground, put it into the reactors, consume it there, and then the current policy is that we'll put it underground for permanent disposal, also called geologic disposal. Before it gets there, it must be stored in wet storage. That's just to keep it cool when it comes out of the reactor. And after about 5 or 10 years of wet storage, it can be stored in dry storage. And because of the current situation in the United States, many reactors are moving some of their older fuel into dry storage. This above-ground storage is a very safe way to store fuel. It's very cool, and just the natural cooling of the air can keep it cool. So that's sort of the baseline. If you go on from there, there's a lot of work that's been done in the United States over the last few decades, as well as in countries like the UK and France and Japan and increasingly Russia and China, to look at ways to recycle used fuel. Just much like we recycle many other things in our society, you can take used nuclear fuel and separate it into the pieces that are truly waste, a very small fraction, the pieces that are the same uranium you put in the first place, and the pieces that are sort of would be waste, but we can put into special kinds of reactors and actually consume that and make electricity out of it. And so that's really where the future lies, I think, for the nuclear fuel cycle, both extending our uranium resource, because that greatly diminishes our need to mine new uranium, but also having some impact on the amount of waste that we actually need to ultimately send to geologic disposal. In all cases, we will need to send something to underground geologic disposal, but there's lots of indications that we could reduce it by a factor of 10 or 100 if we use these recycling schemes. We don't do that right now because it just hasn't proven to be commercially viable,
Sure.
But other countries are looking into it just like we are.
Okay, and do you know in developing countries how prepared they are to take on this disposal process?
So developing countries, this is usually something that comes along after you have a nuclear energy program for a couple of reasons. If you have a very small nuclear energy program, then it's a very small issue to deal with. And you may be better off creating some sort of cooperative agreement with other countries and doing it together. Building a geologic repository for the fuel that comes out of 1 or 2 or 4 reactors is really not a very worthwhile enterprise because there's hardly any fuel. There's hardly any waste that comes out of these from a volumetric point of view. The concrete programs to build geologic disposal usually comes along a little bit behind, although most countries like to have a plan for where they'd like to go. And that being said, there are countries out there who are willing to take other countries' waste and store it for them, particularly in the cases of these small countries that are just starting up. They don't want to have to do this on their own, and there's other countries who, for whatever reason, see a commercial benefit to providing this service.
Okay, and now on to, I guess, more of an international security angle. Are there ways to prevent a country from weaponizing nuclear power? Obviously, there's a significant difference in the tools and facilities that nuclear energy is produced through. And it might be cliche to cite, but is there any way to safeguard against another Iran other than through consistent inspections through the IAEA?
I think, so I used to be of the belief that there were technological solutions to this. And while technology can support it, I think that the only solution to this is diplomacy and diplomatic solutions, which include the safeguards agreements you referred to, using the IAEA to implement those safeguards agreements, and then ultimately the world community's response when those agreements are breached. The technology, whether or not you have a nuclear energy program, the technology is so widely available now that in the absence of diplomatic measures, it's really nothing we can do about it, whether or not countries pursue nuclear energy. If they pursue nuclear energy, then they can maybe hide it in that kind of system, and Iran is the poster child for that kind of behavior. But even if they don't, they have access to the technology and to do things if they wanted to.
Okay. And in terms of diplomacy and, say, the IAEA, do you think that organization works in limiting nuclear proliferation? Excuse me. It works in limiting nuclear proliferation to nuclear energy production?
So I think that the IAEA and in conjunction with the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been very successful to date. I think there's a lot of question about its continued success because of some major technology changes that happened, in the last 10 or 15 years. In particular, the widespread availability of gas centrifuges for enrichment that were enabled by the AQ Khan black market out of Pakistan, and is really what is feeding Iran's technology. It has shown up in Libya, in Syria, in North Korea. That technology leakage, if you will, has probably changed the game substantially and is requiring, deeper and stronger agreements, either bilaterally or multilaterally between countries, to maintain the sense of security and confidence that people have to restrict the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
All right, and I'm glad you brought up the black market there. There's a lot of, and I don't know if it's justified or not, concerned about black market uranium. Along with uranium and other forms of technology like you mentioned, how real do you see this threat being?
Again, I think monitoring is important. One of the things that, for a variety of reasons, we've actually been able to develop very sophisticated monitoring technology. Being able to put it in place is sort of more of a back to the diplomatic question. I guess I don't sense the same concern about black market uranium, at least not raw uranium mined from the ground. There has been concern about securing some of the high enriched uranium that's in research reactors around the world. And the United States has been taking a leadership role in taking its own research reactors and reducing or eliminating high enriched uranium in research reactors, and is continuing to pursue that. And then also, through the Department of State, is working with countries overseas to reclaim or help them eliminate their reliance on high enriched uranium. And that's probably the concern that some people have. But that's a finite problem, because that's what's out there now. If we can remove that from those reactors, then that problem has gone away. And then I think a black market for uranium itself is really not a big concern. This enrichment technology market is really I think where most people's focus lies, because that is a bona fide commercial technology that you could choose to pursue for purely non-military means. But it would give you the capacity, as we see in Iran, I keep coming back there, it would give you the capacity to pursue military goals as well.
Okay, and do you think the United States and Department of State in these measures that they're taking is effective? Do you think it's curbing the desire or ability of states to weaponize their nuclear energy and supporting their goals for using it purely for energy means and not for weapons?
I think the U.S. is I'd give it a B minus or something for what it's doing. It's certainly got a lot of valuable diplomatic efforts in place now. One of the things that is emerging interest is being more proactive with the export of commercial technology. By being a player and being active in the market for commercial technology allows the United States to take a leadership position in how people use that technology.
Okay, so you think instead of just saying no and shutting countries down, the U.S. should maybe involve themselves a little more in the process that these developing countries are going through?
Right, and maybe whether it's involve themselves more or just pay attention to the strategic importance of that involvement. If we look, so a lot of people within the nuclear industry look at the United Arab Emirates, which signed a very restrictive agreement with the United States for nuclear technology, so that was a great diplomatic measure. But on the commercial side, the United States failed to be successful in providing a solution that the UAE was interested in, and instead the Republic of South Korea is going to build their reactors. Now, I have every confidence that the Republic of South Korea is going to do a great job in building very safe reactors, and will probably exert the same sort of diplomatic measures in terms of to restrict alternative uses of that technology. But it's just an example of where the United States has lost out in one particular case, and we may need to be paying attention to not losing every single of the next rounds of of new builds in new countries so that we can have some influence in how those proceed.
That's definitely understandable. That is about the end of the questions I have for you. Do you have any other thoughts or information you'd like to add, or would you like to do kind of a wrap-up of where you see nuclear energy going on the international scene and how we can use it for, let's say, good instead of bad?
Yeah, I guess I would say that I'll do the latter there. So I think that nuclear energy still has a promising future internationally. After the accident in Fukushima, there's a very understandable slowdown, and everyone looking into their industries to make sure that they've planned for the kinds of things that we saw happening there. And in most cases, in all cases that I know of, the outcome of that is, yes, we've done a good job, we have planned accordingly, and we have a safe industry, and so let's move forward again. A few countries have backed away, but most countries are continuing to pursue new licenses. The United States, we've had 4 new licenses for reactor builds since Fukushima. And so we have 4 new reactors under construction right now in the United States. And the rest of the world is going to continue to do that. And the future for nuclear energy is pretty secure because it is really ultimately a low-cost source of electricity that also has pretty good environmental footprint.